Hey, this is Nader with NastyNateTV, and today I'm giving you guys a breakdown of each affiliation in the Hall of Fame format. Bajorans lose very little in the format. The only card I think you could say that they lose is the mission Investigate Maquis Activity. This is a mission that has historically been able to be micro-teamed using the exact combination of the Emissary Benjamin Sisko, Bareil, and Opaka, all from set 1. So this combination has existed since set 2 when the mission came out. But has seen a lot less play recently because micro teaming isn't as powerful, thanks to some cards that have been created. But they do gain a lot from cards that have exited the format. So the big dilemma that hurts them is an issue of trust. Bajorans tend to have a lot of good personnel that have honor or treachery, including those 3 personnel I had just mentioned, and a card like the Bajoran version of Dukat that has treachery. So not having to worry about an issue of trust is going to give you more solid mission attempts. And speaking of Dukat, the other big card that exits the format that helps Bajorans is the Pa Wraith Dukat. So this is the Dukat that hammers a Bajoran player's discard pile. More recently, players have begun to use Metron Arena, which was created in the CC era. This is a protection against Dukat. However, it does take up a mission slot, and being forced to include this mission in every Bajoran deck is going to make your deck weaker. So if you don't have to include this mission and you include a nice additional mission instead, I think it'll improve the Bajorans overall. So I think the Bajorans gain a lot in this format. The only obvious card Borg lose in this format is Knowledge and Experience. This is a very strong interrupt that makes assimilation a strong tactic in the game, because you're able to transition from assimilation to mission solving in the drop of a hat simply with this interrupt. So without that out of the format, assimilation becomes a little less strong. Borg also subtly lose from some more generic cards that have exited the format, one being At What Cost. This is because Borg have probably the easiest way to score 5 points in the game to fuel At What Cost using Annexation Drone. Another card Borg lose in this format is Historical Research, and Borg tend to benefit from this more than other affiliations because they've typically have large decks and they rely on cards to download other cards to fuel their game. So one of the ways Borg typically got moving was if they went second to use Historical Research to download fourth, which would download a lot of other events to get their whole deck moving. Borg do gain from the exit primarily of the dilemma Gamtu Shockwave. This is because this is a very difficult mission for Borg to solve because they don't have any telepathy. Diplomacy is very rare on their personnel, and the only one that has 2 diplomacy is Locutus, who has low integrity. So this has always been a very difficult dilemma for Borg to solve. So I think the traditional Borg decks lose a little bit, but you'll notice they don't lose anything really related to the Borg Dissidents from the Voyager series, or they don't lose anything from the Delta Quadrant. So overall, I think Borg lose a little bit, but not too much. Cardassians were easily the strongest affiliation in this format last year. That's because a lot of the dilemmas that typically hurt them had exited the format. For stops, that includes an issue of trust, personal duty, and Gamtu Shockwave. This is because a lot of Cardassians have treachery or officer and low integrity. So all of these dilemmas in standard hurt Cardassians quite a bit. They don't have to worry about them in Hall of Fame format. Cardassians, even in standard, do a very poor job of kill prevention. So the exit of Tragic Turn and All-Consuming Evil made kill piles a little less strong in the format. So again, this made Cardassians stronger. So they were really a beast last year because all the dilemmas that hurt them were gone. This year, we'll see how things change up a little bit. They lose this year the Central Command. So this is a very strong interrupt that allows you to bypass some dilemmas, so that's gone. Another kind of dilemma bypassing card that got removed from this format is Telly this year. So the loss of both of those cards hurt Cardassians. Also, Crisari Rendezvous is a historically strong mission for Cardassians with that out of the format. Cardassians just kind of have to find another mission. But I think the big losses are the Central Command in Telly. So overall, I think Cardassians are still pretty good because there's the dilemmas that hurt them don't exist. But we'll see how it changes this year with Central Command and Telly out. There are very few cards in this format that have been retired which directly affect Dominion. One of Dominion's primary tactics has been to micro-team strength missions. Survey New World is a card that has exited in this format. This is one of those missions that Dominion was able to micro-team. But there are other options available. I think Teplin Prime might even be a better option than Survey New World. So you might be able to use this as a replacement or find many of other strength missions that can replace Survey New World. At the same time, one of the ways you can counter micro-teaming is a card like Uninvited, but Uninvited is now eliminated from this format. So I think maybe overall Dominion might even be in a slightly better position to solve their missions. And I will say that Dominion has probably now the strongest interrupt prevention in the game in terms of our death is glory to the founders. So this is still remains in the format, but Grav Plating Trap, which might be considered the best interrupt prevention in Standard, is gone. So Dominion might have the strongest interrupt prevention in the game now. So overall, I think very little effect on Dominion, maybe even slightly better. There are quite a few cards that have been retired which directly affect Deep Space Nine. This year, there was a combination of 3 cards that have been retired, which all kind of serve the same effect. This is the USS Centaur, the only ship so far that has been retired, and the missions Protect the Escapees and Investigate Destruction. So how these 3 cards worked in parallel is the Centaur was used to boost attributes on all your people, and then both of these missions are very easy to solve integrity missions. So you could plan your deck around solving these 2 very easy missions for 60 points, and then any 40-point planet mission to win the game. With the retirement of the Centaur, it opens up some other popular ship options for Deep Space Nine. The probably most obvious one is the USS Sao Paulo. So this already sees a lot of play as kill prevention. Very good card on its own. But there are other options now that if you're going to different missions to look at. I really like the USS Defiant. This is the one that gets you 5 more counters if all your missions are Gamma Quadrant missions. So you might leave the Alpha Quadrant and head to the Gamma Quadrant and use this ship to do it. And at the same time, another Defiant I really like is the Patrolling Warship. So this is the one that stops an opponent's ship whenever they move to your mission, if you have a commander aboard. So this is a really good ship if you're worried about interaction. So if you don't want to go to the Gamma Quadrant, but you want to prevent against some interaction in the format, you might play this one. Another card that Deep Space Nine lost is Quark Vastly Outnumbered. So this is a card that has received errata recently. Used to be able to download any card, now he only downloads a subset of cards. But this isn't a huge deal, particularly because there's the original Quark, True Ferengi, which lets you download any card like the old version of Vastly Outnumbered used to do. So if you want to download any card or maybe some specific cards, you can still play this version of Quark. Other cards which affect Deep Space Nine is the exit of security drills. This isn't particular to Deep Space Nine, it's particular to every Fed affiliation, but the bonus skill gaining is impossible now. And the one card they gain from all these things is the exit of moral choice. So this, like security drills, affects every Federation affiliation, but obviously affects Deep Space Nine. So overall, I think Deep Space Nine loses a little bit, but I think there are plenty of good options still available for them. Ferengi are my pick for the top affiliation Hall of Fame this year, and it all centers around the exclusion of At What Cost from the card pool. But before I get into that, I wanted to kind of give you this example why I think Ferengi are in such a good position. So cards are generally costed appropriately, and if you look at 3 different versions of Bashir, I have the hologram version of Bashir, the Bashir from Vastly Outnumbered, and the Bashir from Premier. They go in a series of 2 cost, 3 cost, 4 cost. And the cost generally reflects of how good they are as a personnel. So the LMH is simply stats and attributes and some skills. Many of those exist on this version of Bashir, but in addition to having just slightly better stats, this Bashir also has a nice effect where he's able to save people if a condition exists. Now, this version of Bashir from Premier, this has many of the same skills as the other one and the same attributes, but the condition isn't needed for his save to happen. So you can kind of see that cards are generally costed appropriately. Maybe not a shocking revelation. But because of that, the game is basically a management of counters against your opponent. So you're managing these resources you're spending on personal each turn, where you can gain slight advantage over the game by, for example, killing more personnel of his than he does of yours. Where at the end you'll have a counter advantage over him. One of the ways that you can swing this counter advantage in your favor is a card like At What Cost, where you can use some counters to score points and then get more counters back thanks to At What Cost. But with this out of the format, relatively few affiliations are able to get more counters in each turn than 7. And Ferengi have 2 ways to do that. One is using the more historical route of using Par Lenore in combination with Rule of Acquisition 141. So there's a number of ways you can get this rule underneath your Ferenginar, and then at the start of your turn you put it in your core, and then at the same time you can use Par Lenore to destroy that event to get 9 extra counters that turn. So this is one way Ferengi have to get bonus counters. The other way that came about more recently is using a combination of Martis Mazur, I'm probably butchering that, to play Alien Gambling Device for 1 cost, and then destroying that using treasured collectibles. So this way you can gain a counter advantage as well. So Ferengi are in a really good position, I think, because they're able to get around pretty much the same counters that everyone else has to use. So they're going to be at a huge advantage, and they're already a relatively good affiliation. I guess, and also one card that has exited the format, which helps them as well, is the exit of An Issue of Trust. Like many kind of bad guy affiliations, this hurts Ferengi, although not as bad as maybe some others. So I think Ferengi is going to be in a really good position. Cleons are a fairly average affiliation standard, but I think they're in a pretty good position as well in Hall of Fame. And it primarily has to do with the exclusion of An Issue of Trust. Issue trust affects many affiliations, but I think it actually affects the Cleons quite a bit more in 2 ways. So one of the ways Cleons typically have played is using trying to solve strength missions, using honor Cleons, and using treachery personnel as fodder for a card like Gowron. But the other way that's emerging to play Cleons, which I think is pretty cool, is to use treachery Cleons. So using a card like the Vorn, which boosts attributes on your treachery Cleons, treachery personnel, in combination with a card like No Peace in Our Time. So No Peace in Our Time gets your treachery Cleons cunning. So this actually opens up an archetype where you can use cunning on treachery personnel to solve your missions, but becomes less viable when An Issue of Trust is in the format. So with that out of it, I think this is a viable option for them. Another dilemma that hits Cleons pretty commonly is personal duty. A lot of leaders or officers in the Empire. So this Gone helps them quite a bit. In terms of missions, one of the popular missions for them for a long time has been Cardassia 4, Rescue Prisoners, just a very easy mission for them to solve. One non-unique has all the mission skills himself. But at the same time, if the best Cleon decks are going to be treachery heavy and solve cunning missions, this isn't a big deal to lose. So I think Cleons are in a good position. Maquis were one of the best affiliations last year, and they're looking really good this year. So they already had an issue of trust gone from the format. Um, like many affiliations, they had a lot of treachery personnel that get stopped by this. But new to this year, moral choice is now gone. So this is another dilemma that hit Maquis in particular. And the last thing I'll bring up is they're kind of the counter argument that I was making about with Ferengi and counter and resource advantage. So one of the ways Maquis works is they try to limit the counters the other way. So instead of trying to gain counters, they reduce the counters, the effective counters your opponent is able to spend. So cards like Stalling for Time and Shankar put that counter advantage in your favor early and often in some cases. So with an exclusion of at what cost, many affiliations won't have those extra counters. So it'll be interesting to see if the Maquis are able to very efficiently slow down many affiliations that they weren't able to hurt quite as bad before. So Maquis, again, going to be very strong. They could even be the best. Relativity is a pretty decent affiliation in Standard. And the primary way they're able to win games is by using temporal transporters to bring personnel, any Federation personnel, from your discard pile and put them on your ship. And the way this wins in Standard is it uses temporal transporters to cheese out Kirk and sometimes Chakotay, in addition to the revised Chakotay that can naturally play out the ship. So this is the primary mechanic that Relatively uses to win games by cheesing out personnel that are too good. And Hall of Fame solved that by retiring all three of these personnel. So Relativity, not any good in Hall of Fame format. Romulans are one of the best affiliation in Standard format, and it primarily comes from their ability to score bonus points early and often, using both prejudice and politics and getting under your skin. Both of these cards are still available in the Hall of Fame format, but the cards that they lose these points to gain bonus effects are now gone. One being Power Shift, which uses these bonus points to turn into better mission solving, and the other being At What Cost, which turns those bonus points into extra counters. So both those cards are eliminated from the format. It might be more difficult now for Romulans to play big personnel like Denatra with At What Cost being out of the format. Another card that helps Romulans quite a bit is These Are the Voyages, also playing off of this ability for Romulans to play expensive personnel, or alternatively use on a card like P-Toll, which can be played for relatively cheap. These Are the Voyages is out of the format, so that ability for the Romulans to get some extra draw and cycle is gone. Romulans do gain slightly from a card like Issue of Trust going out of the format, but overall, if you look at their primary deck type over the last 5 years, it'll suffer quite a bit. But I think there is a lot of opportunity for innovation in Romulans. Romulans have a lot of options available for them. We recently had Greg Dillon on to talk about his world's winning deck. There are a few cards that have been removed that affect his, but overall, I think you could play his deck in Hall of Fame quite easily. There are discard mechanics still available for Romulans that don't get played a lot but are still very good. So I think Romulans overall will not be as good as they are in Standard, but if you're looking for affiliation to try to innovate on, this is the affiliation to look at. Starfleet is good affiliation in Standard and remains about the same in Hall of Fame. There's only maybe one or two cards that affect Starfleet at all. Like many affiliations, Starfleet has a way to score bonus points early in the game through A Sight for Sore Eyes. So this card still exists in Standard format, but the reason to score 5 points primarily is to use At What Cost, which is now gone. So that mechanic is eliminated from Starfleet's toolbox. The other card that's been removed, which affects Starfleet, is Grav Plating Trap. This is because Starfleet has the easiest access to Trellium D. They can make this a zero cost equipment to make Grav Plating Trap even better. That's gone as well. But I think these are probably two minor differences. So Starfleet will be pretty good still. Terok Nora has never been a particularly strong affiliation in Standard. The one time they were competitively strong before a lot of errata was the using Crisari Rendezvous as the mission and trying to score as many bonus points as you could off this mission. So combined with 3 equipment, a couple ruling councils, pre-errata versions of ruling councils, and the ship Tenectalar, you could score 65 points off one Crisari Rendezvous. And then you would follow that up with a very easy mission like Survey New World to get your 100 points. Now, both Survey New World and Crisari Rendezvous have been inducted into the Hall of Fame. So this option, which isn't really an option anymore, isn't even viable. The one card that has been eliminated from the format that helps Terranor quite a bit is the elimination of Gomtu Shockwave. Terranor just has very few diplomacy personnel, and many of them have low integrity. So very difficult dilemma for them to pass historically. But if you're playing Terranor in 2019, you should really be playing the the remove dilemmas from the game mechanic. It's really fun. I'm playing it right now in an online tournament, and it revolves around using the cards that help you remove dilemmas from the game, like War of Attrition and Tenuous Alliance. So these events help you remove your opponent's dilemmas from the game, ultimately to put undermine defenses into play, so your personnel can't be randomly selected. This is actually a really fun mechanic, and it's much more interesting than just try to score the biggest Crisari Rendezvous you can. So I think if you're playing Terranor now, you should go this route. TNG has a lot going on in Hall of Fame, and I think that's reflective of its history as an affiliation. So the primary archetype of TNG, which was good in the late Decipher days and early CC era, is one revolving around playing personnel for very, very cheap, often 1 or 0 cost. So one of the primary variants of that was using cadets, and there were others non-cadet versions which had similar mechanics to it. But both revolved around using a card like Loaxana Troy, which is a 6 cost personnel, but usually only costs 1, to get extra draw out of These Are the Voyages. Now both Loaxana Troy and These Are the Voyages have been eliminated from the format, so this isn't a particularly good deck. But it hasn't been too popular recently, and it's lost strength over time. But a more popular, what I would call a TNG hybrid deck has emerged, and that's what's known as the Jaeger Bomb deck. And this deck revolves around using Guinan to score bonus points, to fuel both Jerish Inyo, and At What Cost. So again, At What Cost is eliminated from the format, so trying to get out big personnel like Kirk, which has been present in all TNG decks for a long time, either version, doesn't exist anymore. So I think both those archetypes will suffer quite a bit in Hall of Fame. What I do like is the kind of the new age TNG, using New Life to try to facilitate this agreement with your opponent where you're both getting some benefit, but you're getting slightly more. Things like this with Common Ground to bring out data. So this whole mechanic still exists in the format, and I think is a pretty simple way to play. In standard, TOS is an average to below average affiliation, where in Hall of Fame they benefit a little bit from the exclusion of moral choice and personal duty, as many of the TOS personnel are Federation personnel with officer. They lose out a little bit because they like to solve low integrity missions often. One in particular being Investigate Destruction, a very common mission for TOS. And they lose out a little bit on a attribute gaining from security drills, which is also out of the format. But for TOS, it's always been about the Kirk. And the primary way that TOS has been played over the years is to play many low-cost personnel, often not using their upgrade ability, and then playing a big, beefy James T. Kirk original thinker. And this deck played a lot like the Cadet, the Weenie TNG decks that were popular during the same era. But now with Kirk out of the format, it opens up some options. So there's the four cost Kirk from uh, the motion picture, where you can remove people from random selections. So this now maybe becomes an option for TOS, or a better option for TOS. Or you might want to go the alternate universe route and play the this version of Kirk to boost your personnel up a little more, and then use a card like I think Standard Punishment to help out even more. So either of those are options now. But one of the decks that TOS has had always that's been pretty good, that sometimes is a bear, is the TOS battle deck. And that revolves around using really low cost ships and events like point blank strike to blow up your opponent's ship. So that mechanic is still in the game, always an option for TOS. Okay, so we're at the last affiliation. If you made it this far, leave a comment in the comment box. I'd love to hear if anyone actually made it this far. Anyway, so we're talking about Voyager now. So Voyager benefits a little bit from moral choice going out of the format, and I think a lot more from where no one has gone before out of the format. Because if your Voyager gets hit by this, you basically have a turn where you can't play any personnel. Pretty problematic for Voyager, so that's nice for them. Uh, they lose a little bit out on security drills like other Fed affiliations. But where Voyager really has some questions is with the Chakotys. So Chakotys have been the strongest cards for Voyager for a long time. First with the original bridge between two crews Chakotay, which prevents stops, and then the revised Chakotay, which prevents even more stops. So those two in combination were really strong for a long time. Both are gone from the format. The obvious replacement is the four cost Chakotay, which makes your missions easier and easier as you solve more space missions. Uh, Kind of a nice archetype that has some things to worry about, but pretty good overall. I really would have liked to see a meta where the seven cost Chakotay exists with these are the voyages. I think that would have been kind of cool to see if he would have been actually playable in a world without the original Chakotay. Um, but I guess we'll never know. One of the things I think that's kind of maybe a little disappointing for Voyager as well is the option that's existed since the long journey home, where you can complete four space missions and with 100 points win the game. And more recently with this mission, Alsurian Sector. And because four missions would often get you many more than 100 points, you could use field studies to put more dilemmas underneath. So with field studies now removed from the format, it's going four space Voyager is even harder. Um, maybe good overall. I'm falling asleep.